It's organization Agora from Russia. I've got a question, I think, to all speakers. Many speakers during this conference mentioned that the existing international legislation is enough to protect freedom of expression. But we see that there are many issues connected exactly with the internet. For instance, freedom of access, right to be forgotten, or so on. Don't you think that it is strongly needed some guarantees of these internet rights?
Okay.
In any way, as an additional protocol to the European Convention or some other way? Thank you.
And just before you sit down, do you have any suggestions of who might produce these guarantees and what they might entail?
I think that additional protocol would be the most effective way.
Fine. Who would like to go on that? Gary? Or,
I've been thinking very much about this, and I think it is important that we have sort of international agreement on how we're going to go about protecting ordinary citizens online, and that we start to see ourselves as citizens in cyberspace, that we have the same civic rights. I think it might be useful, I'm not sure, I've been looking into maybe an addition to the Declaration of Human Rights, the UN Declaration, of adding the word online to privacy. And I think it would be really useful if there would be maybe just simply a conference about this at some stage, or a seminar, because it's something that needs to be explored much better. So
any other quick observations on that? No? Oh, yeah, Ian, you go.
Well, very, very quickly, I agree it could be I certainly don't think existing human rights law is completely sufficient. I think if applied more carefully online, it would have a lot of the impact, perhaps, that many people in the room would hope for, but not completely sufficient. There are mechanisms for doing this. I mean, Frank LaRue, for example, published a very good report last year at the UN about online freedom of expression, which sets out, I think, very clearly how important online freedom of expression is. Whether UN special rapporteurs are another mechanism that you could use to achieve this.
Fine. Richard, quick word.
I think something like the Cybercrime Convention is quite an interesting model for this. Just to reflect on why it might be important, we went through this moment in the United Kingdom last year where the United Kingdom government has a very strong position in favour of freedom of expression on the internet, very public position. We had a particular incident in the United Kingdom, and there was an immediate reaction that suggested, and the United Kingdom government never adopted this as policy, but they allowed people to talk about disconnecting the internet as a response. And I think in those circumstances, the fact that a government had signed up to some kind of international agreement, convention, very public commitment, would help to temper that very immediate reactive response, which you know, the United Kingdom's not an exception. I think we could see it repeated in a lot of countries. Something bad happens, the immediate reaction is, what can we do? And one of the things we could do is turn off the internet, and that, you know, is not a good dynamic. So to interrupt that flow, I think a convention could be helpful.
I think just in order to help, I think you were referring to David Cameron's response to the August riots, were you, and switching off BlackBerry Instant Messenger.
Yeah, and there wasn't, you know, people, you know, it was very much a sort of panic reaction. People did briefly look at that as an option. And I think tools that help to, I mean, the argument in the end was weighted the other way, and we went the right way, but to have international agreements and tools that help us to stay on the right side of the argument would be helpful.
Fine, good. Next. Gentleman here, yeah. And if you are going to be making any, keep them very tight. Microphone coming. Here.
Alexander Borisov, very short remark, very short question concerning social media. Social media has become a powerful tool for change in the world. At the same time, could you, I mean all the panelists, could you elaborate a little bit expansively on legal aspects, not on moral rationality, of using social media for social change, or as one of the panelists said, for changing governments, for changing regimes. How about legal aspects?
That's a very good question.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Richard, I think you need to start on that. There is the accusation of double standards that companies and NGOs see social media as a vehicle for ignoring laws in countries that are regarded as authoritarian and for abiding by laws in countries that are not. It's quite a black and white view. What is the legal status, as the gentleman asked?
I mean, the best way I've found to describe the legal status of internet services generally is that they are a little bit like offshore islands of a particular national jurisdiction. And in many cases, it happens to be that they're offshore islands of California because that's where they're founded and where they're hosted. But the primary legal regime that applies is the legal regime of the country in which they're founded. In the same way, you know, a service found in the United Kingdom's primary jurisdiction is the United Kingdom. If it's in Russia, the primary jurisdiction is the Russian jurisdiction. And then I think what happens is citizens from around the world then travel to that island. And then effectively when they're on the island, they're subject to that baseline jurisdiction. As the service grows and the visits grow, then governments are faced with a choice. And the choice they've got is you can't go to that island. They can effectively refuse their citizens access because they've decided that that's unacceptable. Or they can seek to get some kind of shared jurisdiction. They can seek to carve an area of the island out and apply their local jurisdiction and say, access is conditional on you granting me some jurisdiction over the island. Or they can try and get the island to somehow kind of go to some international norm where everybody's standards are respected and we end up with a sort of international norm across the whole island. So that's how I see the legal situation.
But how is it legally acceptable to, and Afa, if you can help answer this question, to break the law in Tunisia for a certain outcome and not to break the law in the United States?
But just to be clear, I mean, the responsibility of the individual for the actions on the island is entirely down to them. So I don't think, you know, the space is governed. The people who control and manage that space are answerable to their home jurisdiction. And if they don't have infrastructure in another country, that they don't have a direct responsibility to the authorities of that country. The individual citizen who has traveled to that space but is physically still within their home jurisdiction, they of course have all the normal legal responsibilities to their home jurisdiction. But I think it's true that the internet service that is not physically present in a third country has a certain amount of discretion. You know, it's just a matter of fact. They have a certain amount of legal discretion because they can say, we're not in your country. If you don't like it, don't send your citizens here. I mean, you know, that, ultimately they can do that. So that discretion is a matter of fact. The responsibility of the citizen for actions they carry out under their national law is also a matter of fact.
Afef, what's your answer to this question?
I think the problem when it comes to laws, and here I'm not talking about democracies, I'm talking about, again, autocratic regimes, is that these laws, if they, for instance, that Facebook, for instance, would like to apply the laws that exist in Tunisia or in any other country, that these laws are themselves used as, again, an excuse for censorship. So I think that it's kind of, there are like so many laws that, because laws are part of some of the laws, I mean, in Tunisia now, haven't been amended yet. So they are easily being used to assault freedom of speech, and so this is the issue when it comes to Tunisia or any other autocratic regimes.
But I think it needs further probing because if Richard made the point earlier that it is for peoples to change, to put pressure on governments to change legislation if they think a particular law on free expression or the internet is wrong. But at the same time, there appears to be moral support for breaking laws in countries that overtly censor, such as Tunisia, but there is not that same moral support for breaking the law in countries that still censor, impose restrictions, such as most Western countries, but do so in a more subtle way. Is there a legal difference between breaking the law?
Just to answer that very specific question, John, the US, the European countries, and many other countries around the world, by and large, have protected internet intermediaries from liability for the actions of their users.
Right.
And I think that's one of the key reasons the internet has been so amazingly innovative over the last 15 years. Many governments are talking now about slightly rowing back from that, for all sorts of reasons, whether it's privacy, whether it's copyright infringement is another big one. And I think that has risks.
Gary.
If I could just speak to the legal issue concerning European-based entities, their responsibility in terms of personal data is to the information of their users or service providers. The position is that laws from outside the EU do not have effect on European-based entities unless they are domesticated via mutual legal assistance arrangements. So therefore, the position is that a law in the US or a law in Syria, it was mentioned earlier on, do not have direct effect on EU entities unless they are domesticated in some way, whether by a treaty or mutual assistance. So that is the starting point. So if I'm an EU entity, not a California entity, but an EU entity, and I receive a request from a foreign authority for data, I am not obliged to provide it unless there is a domestic law giving effect to that.
Thank you. Right here in the front row. Right here in the front row. Here in the front row, yep. And then gentleman there with the white shirt with his hand up.
Hello.
And then behind him. Yep.
Hello, my name is Murat Tungishbayev. I'm a blogger from Kazakhstan. And I have a question to the Facebook representative. In Kazakhstan, intelligence services, they try to suppress e-activism. There are constant attacks on activists who promote different actions, and a number of groups have been deleted with the help of malware programs like keyloggers, and they identify your password and then enter
Okay, could
your
you come
account.
to a question, please?
And so a number of groups have been deleted. Is it a way that Facebook can help to restore those groups? Or, and another question, if there's a court order from the Kazakh authorities, will you provide information to the Kazakh authorities?
Thank you.
Okay, so to both those points, we invest a huge amount of effort in trying to prevent unauthorized access to Facebook data from any source. The most important piece of advice I would give to you or anyone who's using the service for any purpose is to turn on the feature we've got that only allows you to log in from a known device. And once you've turned that on, if anyone's captured your password or anything like that, and they try and log in from a different computer, they won't be allowed to until we've sent you an SMS and you've entered that SMS code. So as long as you've still got your mobile phone, then that is the number one best way to keep your account secure. And if people try and find a way around that, we'll try and find a way to tackle that as well. Our security team's job is to keep people's accounts safe. To restore the groups is actually, there's a technical issue around groups in particular, around restoring them. So you can give me the information and I'll discuss it with Sonia and our team afterwards to look at specific cases. But I know that when we talk about groups rather than profiles or pages, there's a very specific issue around technically whether or not they can be restored, but we can look at that. You asked about the Kazakh authorities, so I just wanted to clarify the response I made earlier. Just to be really clear, the start of the process, if an authority like your authority wanted to get data, is to put it through the correct legal channels, this mutual legal assistance process. That's not the end of it. So that might result in a valid request being made to Facebook. But we also have our own standards and our own policies in place. So it doesn't mean automatically, even if a request came through that channel, that we would necessarily have to comply with it. It depends on the way in which the request was processed. So I just want to be really clear that there is a international legal system that nobody needs to ask our permission. Any government anywhere can try and use these channels. but it doesn't necessarily result in the disclosure of data, even if they do go through that channel.
Okay, we've got a lot of questions to go through, and so quick questions, quick answers. Gentleman there in the white shirt, and then a gentleman a couple of rows behind him straight afterwards, and then we'll take some tweets, and then we'll come back to some more questions.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, it's working. Just speak into it.
Good afternoon. My name is Jerry Ellis. I'm from here in Dublin, Ireland, and I'm blind myself. Let me just give a bit of background and ask a question. About a year ago, the World Health Organization and the World Bank released a report which stated that of the 7 billion people on the earth at the moment, about 1 billion experience disability. The European Disability Forum puts that figure at around 80 million for Europe alone. There are international voluntary agreements around accessibility on the internet, particularly the World Wide Web Consortium's, what are called WCAG guidelines, about making the internet and so on, and the applications and cloud computing and so on, accessible. And there's the international non-voluntary UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Okay, so these are all ways in which the internet can be made accessible, but if applications and so on the internet are not accessible, people myself who are blind, deaf people and so on, cannot access the internet, whether it's switched on or whether it's switched off, or whether people are trying to interfere or not. So my question is, how can the OSCE as an organisation and countries who are associated with the OSCE promote this and ensure our inclusion and the empowerment that everyone has been speaking about for the last 2 days? Thank you.
We don't have a representative of the OSCE on the panel, but I would imagine that somebody from the OSCE, either briefly now or afterwards at the end of this panel, on behalf of the OSCE, could, or at least should, respond with regard to an OSCE position. But would anybody... Is anybody on the panel feel able? Richard, what does Facebook do in terms of people with disabilities and improving access?
I mean, we work very hard for standards compliance, which is, I mean, the first step I know to meeting the WCAG guidelines is simple W3C compliance with the latest standards for web development. We do work hard at that. I'm sure we're not 100% successful, but we have an internal group that works specifically on our accessibility issues, and I think like most major web companies, that's how it works. There's teams inside the company who innovate perhaps without being sufficiently conscious of the necessity for accessibility, and then there's a team within the company that tries to catch them and remind them of the need of accessibility and make sure that by the time the product is released, you've done what you can. So that's essentially the dynamic, I think, in most major web companies. I hope it means that our products are getting more accessible over time, but if you have specific feedback, please let me know.
Right. Is there anybody from the OSCE who can answer this point? Dunya, are you able to, or could we ask the Irish government organisers to get a response before this meeting is out, please? Could that please be relayed to any of the... Are you able to... Is this a response or a...
Yeah.
Yeah, good, thank you.
I would not speak for the OSCE, but I'm Neil Simon. I'm the communications director for the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. And we try to use videos with captioning and text, of course. We do not do a full-scale recognition of all things we could do to make our site more accessible. But our parliamentarians have tried to promote accessibility issues, and we're in the process right now of trying to highlight good things that parliaments, government, and civil society are doing to engage citizens. And one example that actually just came live today is the government of Liechtenstein. Small population, but 130 plus pages of their website were made accessible to their deaf population today through a partnership of their the deaf community and accessibility community in that country, working with the government and the parliament. And so this is one example that we'll be highlighting in our forthcoming report to showcase the exact type of things that you're talking about and to try to encourage other governments and other partners to work together on those processes.
Okay, thank you. There's a gentleman a couple of rows behind. Yeah, who's just there.
Hi. Dennis Parfenov is my name, and I run a non-profit an Irish non-profit, and we want to build civic applications. But those applications are data-driven. And there is a lot been said about the rights of citizens for information, but not enough was said about the rights of citizens to have access to information in useful formats. And at this stage, the useful formats would be machine readable and non-proprietary. So the information can be, so developers can build
Dennis, can you come to your question, please?
Top of. Okay, my question is twofold. Like right now, open data sets virtually not available in Ireland. We cannot have access to any data on transportation, education, don't mind expenditure. So as we're in Ireland, and we've talked enough about Azerbaijan, Belarus, and Russia, I think like it will be appropriate if Gavin will share his experience of getting access to government data, and Gary will tell us what the Irish government is doing to make more data accessible in machine-readable format.
Thank you very much. Gavin and Gary, questions?
I think I would say that there has been the information or the type of thing that you're talking about refers to an open data agenda that's been quite popular, specifically in the last 5 years, for how people access information, and also related to FOI and mooted reform of FOI here in Ireland as well. And also, interestingly enough, that Spain, which was on the Transparency Report, is currently drafting its first FOI law, the last country in Europe to bring one in. I think in relation to openness and transparency, I think the default position should be transparency first. In other words, the default position should be that governments should just publish the information that they have within reason, i.e. the default position should be transparency, and that we can then debate, as Brigitte was saying earlier, the ups and downs of that. But in terms of machine readable, definitely this is something that's extremely important because, again, it goes back to the point I was making earlier about social data. The same thing applies to all sorts of data, not just tweets, but also to government data, and how citizens and journalists and all sorts of civic society can be better informed. And it's worth remembering that right to information is a human right as well, and it's very important.
Gary.
Well, as an independent authority that sometimes takes positions opposed to the government, I'm not in a position to comment for the government on something of that nature. I do understand from liaising with them that they are live to the potential for the economy from opening up data sets, and they are trying to move to it. In terms of citizen information, the draft data protection regulation, which I mentioned earlier, published by the European Commission in January, speaks of a term about data portability, and that's empowering the citizen to receive their data from entities that hold it in a standardized format that can be ported from one entity to another. Now, I know your question is broader than that in terms of data sets, but that is one real thing that is out there that is happening and will be carried through to the final regulation, I expect.
Okay, where's Robert? Oh yeah, you've got 3 or 4 tweets or tweeted questions.
So a couple of, I'll try to get maybe 2 questions and maybe 1 comment. And so the question is in regards to social media. There's been a change in a real adoption of some key social media platforms over the last many years. And isn't censorship easier when you just have to shut down a few services like Facebook and Twitter? Shouldn't there be more sources, and what do the panelists think about that? The second issue related to that, but issue to some of the privacy comments, is the issue of data portability. As we've seen emergence of different social platforms, an internet user may be starting on one social media and go to another, and what are the comments in terms of can data be ported in and out? There was a question that the panel answered in regards to anonymity, so I'll skip that. And comment here, let's see, for the panelists from Iceland, there are a lot of positive comments in regards to what Iceland did, and I think in terms of a question, or it was seen how when an opportunity arises, that countries or a country comes together to try to do the right thing, and it shows that a rights positive balance can take place. and whether there was a question whether people seeing the economic issues that Europe is facing is another opportunity, and the importance of social networks was also commented as well. So those are some quick comments.
Thank you. That's very helpful. The economic issues is a point that you were making earlier. Who would like to talk about the lack of diversity in terms of social media, the concentration on Twitter and Facebook, and some, but not as many as one might perhaps expect, in-country social media networks?
I think from a news point of view, certainly, I would approach it from a very neutral point of view. I mean, Twitter has been quite successful because it's quite a short path to get news out. It's very efficient in terms of information distribution. So in a way, I would look at it as something that's platform neutral. Whatever service or platform gets the information out and gets the information flowing, I'm prepared to wait and see what I can get from it. So to me, it's that platforms themselves. I would be agnostic with the platform. It's just that Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter particularly have been quite good at building systems that allow that information flow to come about very efficiently. That's not to say that in the future more information platforms won't appear that might compete with somebody like Facebook or somebody like Twitter, but it's about ultimately information freedom, or the ability of information to flow is what's most important.
Brigitte.
Yeah, I totally agree with this, and I think another element that many people are not aware of, how fundamentally different Twitter and Facebook is when it comes to sharing information. So you can absolutely control the feed on Twitter. You can control exactly who you want to follow. Whereas on the relatively new wall of Facebook, you get the top comments on your wall, and for a person like me that has like 5,000 friends, I don't really have 5,000 friends, but it's impossible to have any control of the stuff that I really personally would like to follow. I want to follow people that I don't agree with, for example, to get different perspectives. So I think, like with all social media or all media, like most people have turned off their TVs that are below 20. They don't use the TV set. So as long as we make sure, and one of the things that I really would like actually to encourage Facebook and Google, and other Google is trying to do it now, to simplify the user agreement so that people actually know what rights they're signing off. It's very important. And I think that we need to develop more discussions about, for example, what are we signing off, and it's very important that we can actually move our data, because this is, those of us that use social media a lot, we've invested a lot of time and a lot of value to the information and the content of our social media site. So I think there needs to be sort of a mutual agreement about the value, whose value it is. It's free service, but it's not really free because it's a...
Do you want to just come back on the user agreements as well?
I'll come on the data point. I mean, just be really specific and clear about Facebook. Facebook's terms of service say the data is yours, and we provide a tool called Download Your Info, where you can take all the data off. And we've been working with the Irish Data Protection Commission to add more and more data in. So, all the basic stuff was there already, like your photos, your comments, all of that. And we're now adding in things like the last IP addresses you logged in from, all kinds of contextual data as well. So I would say that we now offer a pretty comprehensive service that is machine readable. If you download it to your computer, again, I'd urge people who are on Facebook to try it. You get a lovely web page that shows you all the data, all nicely XML formatted, all of that kind of good stuff. So that piece I think is important. If I just reflect on that, on the user agreements, I mean, if you ask the question to people, did you read and understand the user agreement for pretty much any internet service, you'll pretty consistently get a 95% no answer. I think the much more relevant question in many cases is, do you understand how that service works? And the user agreement is part of that, and it's a really important legal document. But services can do a lot more in the interface of the service to show you how they work. So the contextual stuff, the use of icons that are familiar, across platforms. So you understand a certain icon means your location is being transmitted. That could be described in 10 paragraphs in the user agreement, but it can be shown through one icon on the screen. So I think that's, as a sector, where we're going. And I hope out of that, it does mean that when somebody arrives at a service, just through the use of that service, they get a really good understanding of how it works. And then if they want to drill down to the user agreement, they can. But you've got all the education you need from the screen.
Right. We're going to take as many questions as we can in the time and then refer back to the panel to answer the questions and to make any concluding remarks. Yep, just there. Thank you. No, behind you, on the right. Lady there, behind, with the waving at you. Yep, thank you. And then one on this side. Yeah, if you want to ask a question, I suggest you sit in the main part. Thanks. Okay, good.
Русский.
Yep.
Я буду говорить на русском.
Хорошо.
Готовьтесь.
Everybody got their headphones on who wishes to?
The English channel. The English channel. This is the English channel.
Я, как вчера говорила, я представляю
Yesterday,
Таджикистан.
as I said, I represent Tajikistan, and I have a request. I'll try and be quick. The OSCE, top brass, the NATO and European Union people, I have understood over these couple of days, or rather I knew and now I've understood even better, that we have different understandings of access to the internet and development of technology. Mr. Kamtan says, can we have your question now? So my request is, when you have big events like this, with resolutions, pacts signed and so on, you need to understand that our countries are different from Europe, we're different from America. The Arab Spring is not something positive for us. Our countries are just less democratic. So what we're trying to say is the internet is just an instrument. Many in the West say the internet is a revolution. But if that's the case, then I think it's never going to develop in our countries. In 1917, they were saying we should shoot everyone who says there's going to be a revolution this year. So for us, we don't want that to happen again. We just want the internet to be something we use. We don't want it to be a way of getting huge numbers of people out onto the streets for them just to get shot.
Yep, here, yep, and then right here in the front.
Do I need to introduce myself again?
Yes, please. Quickly.
Sorry.
Thanks, sorry.
Okay. Luis Salazar from representing the Holy See, the Apostolic Nunciature. No, a very quick question, just to know what efforts are being made to solve the difficulty, the problem of age verification in social networkings. Social networks, because we know that a lot of adults are masquerading as children, so they could be befriending young people, and also children who are underage are lying about their age and they're gaining access to inappropriate material through social networking.
Thank you. Right here in the very front row, and then right here in the front row.
The question is on the screen. Actually, my question is about the duty bearers and rights holders. This is the human rights theory. The question is, are you sure that the private companies can be responsible for human rights? Because when we have any suit case, we're going to the court. It's nothing to do against the private companies. They have no obligations. There are no legal grounds to make them responsible for human rights around the world, globally. They can control your life. They can collect data. And no obligations. I mean, the entity of state as an entity is an ideal party when you're going to the court. It's nothing to do with the private companies. So what we can do?
Fine.
What kind of legal, I don't know, obligations?
Right.
Space? Thank you.
Thank you. Here in the front row. Sorry, yep, there, and then immediately behind you.
Thank you. My name is Dina. I'm from Kazakhstan. So my question, I think, specifically to Ms. Afef Abrougi, journalist from Tunisia. So in your introductory speech, you mentioned that internet and social media have played an important role on coordinating the revolution in Tunisia. So, and as far as I know, Tunisia is a developing country, like Kazakhstan. So, and in Kazakhstan, according to the last survey, only 20% of population have got access to the internet. And what about Tunisia? How many population have got access to the internet?
So lessons for Kazakhstan from Tunisia. Yeah, and then I think we'll take this one, and then we will stop and refer back to the panel.
Я на русском задам вопрос. У меня вопрос такой. Как мы можем сделать, то есть гражданское общество и вообще граждане
as civil
пользователи
society, what
социальных
can we
сетей,
do
как мы можем в будущем
using social network sites? What can we do in the future so as not to have to worry about illegal actions by the monopolists like Facebook? What can we as civil society do to make sure that in 5 years' time it's not going to be 3 or 4 companies that run the whole social networking in all of the world?
Quite similar, the questions 3 and question 5, right. So we've got 2 variations on the monopolistic position of the big internet companies and how they have no obligations. How can they be responsible for determining these issues? Obviously, Richard, you come in on that. There's the specific question about lessons from Tunisia and for Kazakhstan and elsewhere. And we've got questions regarding the question of Tajikistan about the internet as a potential destabilizing influence, and we have a question from the Holy See with regard to age verification. Richard, why don't you just take on those 2 questions first? Yeah. And we're going to conclude in 5 minutes, so let's make this brief. And any concluding remarks you wish to make, do that now.
So I just think it's wrong to believe that internet companies like ours exist outside of a framework within which they have very serious obligations. I mean, in fact, Gary Davis, sitting at the end of the platform, has a very serious, clearly defined legal responsibility to defend the right to privacy of the users, our international users, whose data is controlled from Facebook Ireland down the road here. That right springs out of the European Union's commitment to a right to privacy and as reinforced in recent European Union treaties. So we are firmly within a framework, both in terms of our Irish operations and our American operations, where again there's a whole body of US law which doesn't give us the same kind of human rights obligations as a state entity, but to kind of feel that body of law, which is inescapable for us, it is the jurisdiction that controls us, is somehow devoid of human rights values, I think would be mistaken. So I think we do have a very strong body of law that we have to respond to. Other companies will be generated both within these countries and in other countries and will have similar obligations, and part of the way in which people may choose the services that they're using, and this perhaps was the experience in a country like Tunisia, is the level of confidence they have in the legal regime of the service provider. It's not just the brand of the service provider, but they are saying, where does that company come from? Where is the accountability that that company has to face? And I say, for the United States and Ireland, that's a significant accountability.
Brigitte, do you, and in your concluding thoughts, do you worry about the alleged monopolistic position of these big companies and the lack of diversity in terms of people taking the big decisions on free expression?
Yeah, I worry a little bit about it. With anything that becomes very big, just like, large societies have usually very alienated governments. So you have large corporations, so even if the intent is good, it might be very difficult to deal with. I mean, one Facebook group might be, essential for a particular group, and if it's shut down, it might destroy the operation of the group that people have put a lot of effort into. And the larger the corporation, the harder it is for people to have access to help. But I really want to point out that all these different Facebook or social media or other tools that we have are simply tools to improve our democracy. And I think it is important, one very important element about, for example, Facebook, and particularly Facebook, the way, for example, we used it in Iceland, is that we actually had people co-write our constitution through a Facebook application. So there are ways how we can use these various different tools to get people more involved and more interested in being responsible in co-creating our societies. But I agree, they're too big, or I have a little bit of concern. So maybe Facebook and all the other social media giants can think of ways to actually put more effort into becoming more accessible. because it is a monster to try to figure out how to contact somebody. I've had a group that I had hacked, and yeah, it took a long time to get it up again.
Can we just go around the Afef, on the point about the lessons, what lessons can Tunisia, the Tunisian experience, be helpful in, whether it's regard to Kazakhstan or similar kinds of countries trying to forge a new, hopefully more democratic path?
First of all, I would like to comment on the first...
the Tajikistan one, yeah.
I do agree that social media social media or internet in general was an instrument. It was a crucial instrument because what we had was a media blackout in Tunisia, and we didn't have like foreign correspondents or anything. So I do agree with you. Internet was an instrument, but it was crucial, and I myself don't like these descriptions of what happened as Facebook or Twitter revolutions in Iran. I truly believe that it's kind of superficial to describe them that way, because people took to the streets and they were shot at. For your question, Tunisia is indeed a developing country, but what Tunisia in Africa was a leading country when it comes to internet infrastructure. And I don't have the exact statistics, or the exact number, but we have a penetration rate, internet penetration rate at more than 30%. I think it's 33%, and access to internet is not that expensive. I mean, for instance, if you don't have internet at home, people can, for less than €1, they can spend 1 hour in an internet cafe. So I guess, yeah, these are the numbers that I have. I don't have, I mean.
Thank you. Gary, I was wondering, can you help on the age verification question and wrap that into any concluding thoughts?
I certainly can. To reiterate Richard's point, companies providing services in the EU are subject to EU law. As it happens, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, all are established in Ireland, so we actually have responsibility here in Ireland for all users across the EU. That's a responsibility we take very seriously, and we will ensure that the laws are enforced. They're not immune from laws. Some of the questions, I think, are more about competition law, however, in terms of the size of those companies, and are more properly addressed in that fora. I've been in this job for 6 years, and the issue of age verification has been there from day one. It's a very tough nut to crack without requiring every 13-year-old up to every 80-year-old who uses Facebook or any other type of social network to provide their national identity documents as a means of joining the service. So I don't think we should head for a situation whereby everybody has to hand over very sensitive documents simply to use an internet service. However, there must be some solution in certain situations, but I'm not aware of it yet in a way that doesn't undermine people's privacy in a very fundamental way.
Thank you. Gavin, concluding thoughts?
I think if there's one thing that's clear from some of the discussion that we've been having here is that there's going to be lots more social networks, or there's at least going to be disruption of existing ones. The second thing is there's going to be a lot more people joining the internet in developing countries and in developed countries. The third thing is a lot of those people who join the internet will join those social networks. And all of those factors will create a disruption that's going to change our perceptions of how big the world is, and also, I would hope, bridge gaps between our shared humanity. So I think from the point of view of where the internet's going, it's getting much, much bigger. The amount of data that's being shared, the amount of data that's being recorded and distributed is increasing all the time. And I think that itself brings huge opportunities for us generally.
Thank you. Ian.
On the competition point, I agree with Gary that competition law are actually very well developed in the US and Europe and other countries. Social media are a classic case where you have high switching costs and strong network effects, which both promote large companies. The data protection regulation would address the high switching costs with the mandated portability, but I've also argued that actually for dominant social media you should have mandatory interoperability as well, because if I leave Facebook I can take my profile but my friends are all still there. If the whole point of the service is that I can communicate and share with my friends, well, that's not promoting effective competition.
Good. Right. We have had more than 3 hours of, I think, very varied and stimulating questions and interventions from the floor, and I hope you agree from the panel as well. Given that it's the second afternoon, I think that's particularly commendable for everybody. Are we having a pause now and going straight into concluding remarks, or do we go straight into concluding? Straight in, yeah? We're going straight into concluding remarks, so if I can thank the panel, and we will now move off the set. Thank you.